if that's okay. Hello.
We have no objections.
You have no objections? Well, that's wonderful.
Good morning. This is Senate Judiciary, February 18th. We are taking up S12 again. We have folks from the Crime Research Group just to share some information about just data in general, and also hoping to hear some about desistance and recidivism. I'm hoping we can use that data and information as we get to the end of S12 here. So the floor is yours. Thank you for coming in.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for inviting us. I'm Monica Weaver. I'm the Executive Director of the Crime Research Group.
And I'm Dr. Robin Joy. I'm the Director of Research.
So before we get into kind of the specifics, I thought it might be helpful to go over a little bit about who we are and what we do. I know we've come to speak to this committee many times in the past, but you do have a new member, and so we just kind of give you an overview. Crime Research Group, we are a nonprofit independent research organization in Vermont, focusing on Vermont criminal justice issues. And we've been in Vermont for over 20 years in various forms. The organization started as the Vermont Center for Justice Research. It was based at Norwich at the time. And then 10 years ago, or maybe 11 years ago now, it's 2025, sort of spun off into another organization called the Crime Research Group. Dr. Joy's been with the Crime Research Group since its start and at DCJR. So she's the long-term member of the organization and has extensive history and background really working with criminal justice data, doing extensive research, some of it's award-winning research. And so she is the one who is able to really bring together a lot of criminal justice data across the judiciary, across corrections, across restorative justice. We're able to bring together all of these various data sets and provide pretty significant amount of research and data. And so part of our responsibility as an organization is to come and support you in the State House, answering questions, providing research, but also supporting other criminal justice partners, often working with them independently, providing evaluation services, answering questions, and we also just are available to the community. If somebody wants some information, they can email us or call us, and if we have the information, we'll provide it to them.
Well, before we go any further,
Yeah.
the Senator would like to introduce himself to you.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm Chris Matos. I represent Chittenden North, Milton, Westward, Fairfax, and part of Essex Down. Oh yeah, great spot. Yeah, so first time in Judiciary, I came from the House. I was in Ways and Means and Education.
Okay.
So familiar with the building, but not so much Judiciary, but getting caught up.
Well, it's a fascinating topic. So.
Yeah, sure is. Sure is.
All sorts of things you can learn and do. I'll just say one other thing, because we could go on and on. There is a document that we submitted to you that gives you a little bit more information about who we are and the services we provide, and then a list of a lot of the research reports that we've published. Those are also all available on our website. We work also with the Department of Public Safety. We have a contract with them to be the Statistical Analysis Center. And as such, we're able to access funding. Sorry, my foot's a little froggy at the moment. Through the Bureau of Justice Statistics. That's what funds a significant portion of the research that's on our website. Although we, like I said, we do get other types of funding through independent contracts. What else would you want to
In the past, your late colleague used to just reach out and ask, me for a sentence, like what's the common sentence? And it actually takes me like about 10 minutes to answer that question. So, Senator Gahosky, you were talking about on his file about people had access to their records if they had attorneys, and I was listening to your thoughts, and I was like, oh, I cannot tell her how many people don't have attorneys when they have a guilty plea. The answer is 8.5%. So, and that I answered that question outside. I said, oh, no, I forgot to do that. Let me get that answer for her. So it takes me, because I've been doing this for so long, and I have all these data sets built. I'm very efficient at my job. And so I can answer some of these questions that you may have very quickly. And, Kayla or somebody can email me, and I can usually, get back to them saying, I can do that.
Which most of the time.
You're welcome.
Sitting on our computer, so.
Or I'm listening to that. Sometimes.
So, one of the things, do we go into maybe Act 40, or do you want to do your pyramid first?
I
think you got it.
I got my pyramid.
Lauren really likes her pyramid.
I like that. So we sent to you guys our criminal justice data pyramid. So this tells you where all the data are and what gets excluded from the administrative records, because that's what you're really talking about with S12, are administrative records. And so what gets excluded, whose voices are excluded, and what happens when we, start messing around and deleting records from the administrative records, what gets left, what gets sent, and so on. So at the bottom of our pyramid are the experiences that your constituents and people have. And a lot of those experiences that may be to the level of crime, never get reported to the police, never show up in any administrative record, because they're not talking about it to official folks. There is a national crime victim survey research that's been done. We don't get state level data, so I can't tell you. I can tell you what the Northeast is. I can't tell you what Vermont is. We have tried over the years to do a crime victim survey here. There's just been a lack of funding from the feds to do that, and funding is currently up in the air.
Yeah, it's a little tricky.
And one of the reasons why it's hard to do in a state like Vermont is that to sample a large enough size to get to some of the rare crimes, including sexual assault and sexual abuse, it presents a logistical challenge. But some of our colleagues, before the funding got pulled in Maine and Alaska, did some really good work. And so we have some ideas, but we don't have the funding for that. So, but there is ways to get at people's experiences about crime and how they experience it that aren't in the administrative records. And then we go to the calls for service. And these are the things that get recorded in law enforcement. And this is everything from somebody calling, I admit that I've called the police. And I called the police because there was a loose goat in my neighborhood, which is like the most Vermont thing ever to call about. But that's our animal control person is the, and so there was a record of me calling the police department in my current town saying that there was a goat in my neighborhood. So it includes things like that. It also includes crimes. It includes, motor vehicle stops. It includes all sorts of stuff. And most of the law enforcement agencies beginning in 2020 switched to Valcor. And the Valcor system is not without its problems, but it's the first time that we're actually able now to really compare across jurisdictions. It's easier to get data out of Valcor than it was for Spillman. There's still some communities that are on Spillman, Hartford, and places that are dispatched out of Hartford. So when I give you data requests, so for example, your colleagues upstairs wanted to know how many firearms had been stolen and what was the value of that. So I will use Valcor to get you that information. And then it comes with a footnote that says, except for Hartford, right? But we can now get this sort of great information. And I get de-identified data from Valcor on every 6 months. So we can build up some really interesting questions for you, and get a sense of, for example, how many firearms are stolen. And if you want that information, I can send it to you. The national incident, so not all things are crimes that get reported to the police. So the next level is the national incident-based reporting system. And the national incident-based reporting system was started in Vermont. It's national, but we started it in Vermont in 1993. We became one of the first states to be 100% compliant. And this is a really rich data set that is designed to compare things across jurisdictions. And so what we can do for NIBRs, and this does include Hartford, what we can do is we can answer questions about where do domestic violence incidents take place? How many take place in a school? How many take place in a workplace? How many take place in a garage? So it has a wealth of information about the victim to offender relationship. One of the studies that we did recently looked at the differences between how Black Vermonters experience victimization and how it's different from how white Vermonters experienced victimization. So when we say, which is true in Vermont, that half of our homicides are domestic violence, that's true if you're white. It's not necessarily true if you're a Black victim of domestic violence. So it's looking at these sorts of differences in location, geographic diversity, in racial diversity and gender diversity, and how do people experience crime and who's committing crime. And so that's a great data set that we use. We use it with a caveat that and I recognize those of you from Chittenden County here, that from 2014 to 2016, 2017, your data is bad. The reason why your data is bad is that this ValCore system started in Burlington and it wasn't reporting to the FBI. So we got a call from the then Senator Leahy's office saying domestic violence dropped by 80%, and it did not. Unfortunately, we did not solve that problem. Just Burlington didn't report its data. And so Burlington, South Burlington, Colchester, for those few early adopters, there were some problems with the NIBRS data, which is why we worked with the ValCore agency so I can get the raw data out, right? So I will tell you when I'm using which data set and why, and what the caveats are. There's always asterisks. And then once the cases go to the police, then somebody decides whether or not they're going to file. And here we have 3 data systems that we kind of look at. There's the Judiciary's data system. The state's attorneys came on, the attorney generals came on line with a great case management system, and that got us all the diversion data and the YSAP, the youth diversion programs, pretrial service programs, and so that's a wealth of information that we're able to now work with. And then we don't have access to the state's attorneys or obviously to the defender generals. The state's attorneys are coming online with a new system, and I don't know where the defender general is with theirs. But then, right, so we're still limiting. So we've gone from all the crime that people experience down to now we're getting to those things that are charged. And then we get to sentences. We get that data from the judiciary. And then some people who are sentenced go into the Department of Corrections, either into a facility or they get sentenced to probation. And so we work with their data as well. So what we are able to do is once something comes in here, a call enforcement for law enforcement, it gets assigned an incident number. That incident number is unique. I can trace that incident number across all the systems. And so this allows us to do some really robust research to find out what cases are eventually prosecuted, so taking all the information about what type of weapon was used in this crime, it allows us to build a holistic idea of what the crime was that led to the sentence that was imposed. And top of that, the thing that we're talking about today are criminal histories. So our criminal history system, and I know you've heard from Mullen, takes from ValCore, it takes from the judiciary data, and it takes from the corrections data. So all 3 systems are moving into our Vermont criminal histories. We have audited our criminal histories once, and now that we are going we just got another grant to audit them again because of the switch to the case management system in the judiciary. So whenever you switch case management systems, you want to make sure that everything's going smoothly. So we're going to audit criminal histories again for accuracy and for accurately reflecting. When we did audit them, the last time, they were exceedingly accurate. One of the most highest accuracy rates in the country. And so we're very, that takes a lot of effort and a lot of work. And so I do want to say that at least when we have them, they are accurate. So that is our data. That is our data lake of things that we have access to. All right. And how we put it all together to help you inform policy decisions. So we took data from almost all of these systems to do something called the Act 40 report. And we're going to just talk about one part today, which is the recidivism part. But there is a whole bunch of stuff that you guys ordered us to do that we did.
Yeah, I'm just going to share my screen here. Oh, sharing's not turned on, Kayla.
Oh,
It says
okay, just a second.
boundaries.
I do have a quick question.
Yeah.
Get into the recidivism. If anyone has another question. I know you mentioned Valcourt. Now that the state of Vermont is basically with the exception of Hartford completely on the Valcourt system. I know the Spillman is still there and it was still
Yeah.
maintained for legacy purposes. How far back do you look? Is it just
So
how long do
Yeah.
you use that information on Spillman?
I don't, because there was one person in the state that could get it out and it was really complicated. So as a researcher, the benefit, and I'm just talking about from the research perspective, the benefit of Valcor is how easy it is to get data out. The problem with Spillman was it was created in best practices of database creation from the 1980s. In the way that the tables are set up and things like that. So the Vermont, she now works for the Vermont State Police, but Betty Wheeler was the Spillman expert and the one person who would get data out. And so it was very, very difficult. So we don't do historical data from Spillman. If there isn't a report for it, and there's a lot of reports in there that I can get local agencies to run. But oftentimes that's me going down to the agency and telling them which buttons to press, which is fine. But historically, I don't deal with Spillman. Historically, I would use the NIBRS data if I wanted to give you crime rates with the caveat that 2014 and 2017 is good.
Okay, thank you.
Great, so just,
Senator Roski.
oh,
Thank you. So how does that 2014, 2017 data not being good impact what we're seeing? You know, there's been a lot of conversation about rises in crime, and is that impacting what that looks like? Like if all of Burlington wasn't reported?
No. Well, it depends on who's reporting it, right? So when I report things out, I don't include those years. I go
Okay.
back to 2018 is when I start.
Okay.
2018 is when I'm really confident that the numbers are good. We are working on rebuilding some of those, but because up until 2020, you know, only the Chittenden County folks were on Valcourt, it hadn't been really adopted yet. It's hard to compare. One of the things about NIBRS data in particular is that they use words that we don't. The language that they use for crimes are not Vermont statutes, because we're trying to compare across the country. So an assault is an assault. In NIBRS has a particular definition. We have a row of statutes that go in to say, okay, this is assault. So I do not report in those lower years.
Okay.
We report from 2018 forward, and that's what we did for Act 40. And there is an interactive website where you can see and you can play around with the clearance rates, the arrest rates. We also did something on the type of arrest, because there's different types of arrest and have different consequences for folks. And so you can see that data there as well.
Okay. But there hasn't been a rebuilding of that data enough that reporting on that data is at this point active, right?
Yeah, it would depend on what you want to report and where. If you had a specific question, I would sit down and try to figure out how to answer that specific question about a specific crime. I'm not going to try to rebuild all of Burlington's calls for service.
Understandable.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's just really helpful to
Yeah.
kind of have a sense that that's kind of a black hole that is not
Yeah.
reliable
Yeah.
information.
and just started
Yes.
2018.
Yeah.
So I'm just gonna give you the brief overview of Act 40, and then we'll focus in on the recidivism question, but, many of you were here in 2023, when S14 was introduced and, eventually passed as Act 40, an act relating to criminal justice related investments and trends. And so you all know that this was a pretty extensive report where you were very clear about what you wanted us to report to you. And I'm not going to go through it, but you can see I listed it all here on the website. So yeah, and so we were able to do that. Thankfully, we were able to get funding from the Bureau of Justice Statistics to do this report. We didn't get any type of allocation or appropriation out of Act 40. And so we have been able to, like I said, get funding to do the first report. It did require 2 reports, one in 2027. At this point, we do not have the funds to do a 2027 report. So that's a conversation that we'll need to have. But generally, as Robin said, you know, we got a lot of extracts from the various departments. So in addition to sort of what we get typically, this report required us to get specific information that was identifiable from the various departments here, and we were able to do that, come up with MOUs, and sometimes it takes a while. So for instance, it took almost a year to get data from the judiciary. That has nothing to do with, their willingness or interest. It's just, that's how long sometimes it takes. And we just want to share that with you when it comes to like doing a new report that's something different, just for your awareness. It's not something that can just be like pulled together out of thin air because of the way data's exchanged. So the way the report is set up, and this is all on our website, you can go to the research roundup and get to this page. And then each section of the report has its own interactive site. So Dr. Joy is talking about NIBRs and arrest and clearance rates. And so if you click, I'm not going to click on it right now, but if you click on it, you can go there and see what we reported. I have up the recidivism report. Probably wants to be low, which is fine. So we're gonna go through this as this is the main source of your questions, I think. Yeah.
And to give a little history on how we got to where we are today. So there is an official definition of recidivism that the state passed in 2011. So this was part of the first justice reinvestment. And the idea behind this recidivism definition was so that you could compare us to Arizona. That was actually the
For example, but
that was the hypothetical at the time,
Yeah.
2011. Because our felonies aren't 1 year felonies, right? So a lot of states, the cutoff to deciding what a felony is, a serious offense is 1 year. We have 2 year felonies, we have a year and a half felonies. We have 2 year misdemeanors, we have a year and a half misdemeanors. We don't use that 1 year cutoff, and some states don't. And so when you're trying to compare what our recidivism rate is to other jurisdictions, having that baseline of 1 year was what Senator Sears actually wanted. And so it starts with this very narrow definition of only people who have been sentenced to incarceration for 1 year or more. And that's the key right there, 1 year or more. Have been sentenced to incarceration, and then who, after release from incarceration, returned to prison within 3 years for a conviction or for a violation of supervision. And one of the things about this definition is that you will see, especially when if you play around with this report and go to the returns section, a change in policy is going to change your recidivism rate. A change in law is going to change your recidivism rate. It has absolutely nothing to do with what the individual did, but you change policy and now your recidivism rate is going to change. And so some of the policies that changed with Justice Reinvestment 2, which was what was happening before COVID, was when people are being returned to prison, when people are being returned on violation. So they have reduced some of those returns. That was the goal. And so your recidivism rate is going to go down. Because you changed the policy, not because we did anything different. If you decriminalize pot, which you did, you're going to reduce the recidivism rate because that was one of our most common crimes. Misdemeanor possession of pot was one of the most common crimes in the criminal courts before it was decriminalized. But now you can't commit that crime anymore, so you're going to reduce the recidivism rates for people who reoffend. To be clear, under the official definition, most people who possess pot would never qualify as a recidivist because they didn't go to prison for a year.
nor would people who had,
Yeah.
nor would people who got a probation sentence.
Right.
Right, so it had to, the sentence had to include an incarceration period of at least a year. You didn't have to serve that year, right? You could have a max of a year.
Yeah.
But your sentence had to include that. But if you were completely sentenced to probation, that group of people is not included in the current definition. If someone violated their probation and then the sentence was imposed and then they came back out, they would be included then, but not at their original sentence. So it's very, as Robin started, limited. It's a small set
It's a
of people.
very limited definition. In 2023, 26.9% of all individuals sentenced in criminal court were sentenced to a incarcerative sentence. And of those, so right, out of 100% of people who were sentenced in criminal courts, 26% were actually sentenced to a time inside. And of those, another 25% were sentenced to more than 1 year. So you're reducing the amount of people. It's a very small number of folks who are actually considered recidivists in statute. You are missing absolutely everyone who's charged, who gets probation, fine only, and then less than 1 year. It is not an accurate reflection of anything other than what is in that. Other than this very narrow definition, right? And I want us to start and actually, because part of the reason why we're here was your discussion about about stealing records, et cetera, and recidivism rates. Nobody uses this number. So the Department of Corrections publishes this number. It's on their website. They have a nice dashboard. You can go look at it. It has no effect on anything, except that maybe sometimes you guys look at it. It's not used in criminal court. It doesn't affect my sentence on whether I'm a recidivist or not by this definition. It doesn't affect anything that I get for programming. It doesn't affect my life at all as a criminal defendant. It is just there for you.
The recidivist.
The recidivist
The
number
criminal history that has all that information is very individualized.
Yes, it's very individualized.
But the recidivism number as like an indicator of something that changes for a person's interaction with the criminal justice system.
Right.
There's no connection.
And so there is a lot of discussion this year about this definition, not just in this room, but in this building. And one of the things we keep asking people is, what are you going to do with it? Like, what do you use this number for now? And if we change the definition, how do you want to use it? As a researcher, I only put this in there because sometimes people want me to. That's it. This is not how I would define recidivism. This is not how any researcher, academic researcher would define recidivism. This is an entirely political creation so that you can compare across jurisdictions. We would define recidivism in Vermont when we do research, and this is based on the quality of our records and the records that we can use. So when we use administrative data to capture recidivism, we're talking about those criminal histories. Those criminal histories are fingerprint supported, so that's huge, right? So I know I'm tracking the right person. There are things that, because of Vermont's just our processes and so on and so forth, not all arrests are captured in criminal histories because they're not fingerprinted. Right. So, or they're behind setting their arrest cards in or something like that. Jeff can explain when we take things, regardless of statute, when we take things off of criminal history. So if I get arrested but nobody ever files a charge against me, that arrest is going to come off my criminal history. And that has nothing to do with your bill right now. That's just the way it works. And what the FBI will accept, right? Because the FBI is also kind of overseeing what is acceptable to be transmitted to the FBI, what data they're going to accept, Mr. Blythe. Thanks. We try to get access to what is called III, that is the interstate criminal histories. It is difficult. There's basically, I'm one of the few researchers in the country that has gotten them. The other researchers that get them are the Bureau of Justice Statistics, and they get an annual extracts that they use in a lot of their reports that you'll see on their website. When we get them, and it's a pain to do it, and what they do is they send me 10,000 pages that I then have to code and work with to figure out, right? So, and I do it with a computer, but still, it's not easy. When we looked at these out-of-state criminal histories, we found that about 40% of our cohort had an out-of-state criminal history. And that's because, if you're down in Brattleboro, where the chairs, you make a wrong left turn and you're in Massachusetts. We have a lot of places where you make a wrong left turn and you're in another state, and that's where you get your DUI. Or we have people who moved here from out of state and they come with criminal histories. So there's the criminal histories that you can control, which is your bill, and then there's these other criminal histories that you don't control, that are also impacting the way that people experience our criminal justice system. I'm gonna stop there for a second. So,
Questions, anybody? I have one.
Good.
So in a perfect world.
Yeah.
Which we'll probably never see. What would be, in order to capture the most accurate information on recidivism, what would be your definition that you would recommend?
if you're going to go with, it depends on what you're measuring, right? And so, the most accurate thing, if I was queen and I had all the research money in the world, I would find a way for people to trust us and talk to us and tell us about their offending patterns, right? Because all I see is what shows up in the official records. I don't see, so for example, with domestic violence, we know obviously that's not reported very often. We also know that what some victims self-report, especially after the offender is going through some sort of treatment, is that it's less, right? So that kind of desistance, the opposite, it's less. And that's an outcome that she likes, is that it's less. It may not be what we want none. But it's less is okay. So in a perfect world, I would talk to people about how they would define it. And I think you find it's very personal. In an administrative records world, I would use convictions. And the reason why I would use convictions is because they're there. It's also an idea that there's some grain of truth that the person is culpable for something. There are lots of people in our criminal justice system who plead guilty to crimes that they are not actually culpable for. It happens, we know this, and but it's how the system works. And so how do we tease that out? And what are you really measuring? When we're looking at it, program evaluation, did the program do what it set out to do? We usually look at 3 years. And the reason why we look at 3 years is to see if they reconvict, if they've got a new conviction for an offense. And actually it's a timeline thing. I get out of the program today. 3 years from now, I may not have a conviction, but I have committed a crime, and that case is still working its way through. So what we look at is we look at any conviction for which the incident date was within that 3 years. Because we don't want to measure the delays in the court system. That's not what we want to measure, right? We want to measure people's behavior. The reason why I use 3 years is 3 years is about what you can expect a program to have influence over. And then after that, either the person has internalized or something else may have happened that is the reason why the person is reoffending or not reoffending, or the person is moved away. Lots of things. So 3 years is how well did this intervention impact this human's life, that they changed behavior, or that we have removed conditions that allowed the offending to occur. So we have two of our most common crimes are crimes that are, I just call made up. Violations of conditions of release. It's most common criminal charge in our court system. We made that up, right? That is, that's what it is. We have a report coming out on that soon. But it's totally right. So if you remove conditions, and then the person can't violate, right? The only people who can violate conditions of release are people who get conditions of release. Everyone who gets released on their own recognizance can't commit that crime. Another very common crime in our criminal justice system is DLS, right? This is everyone's problem child. I can't tell you how many community hearings I've been in DLS in 20 years. But this is, again, if we reinstate your license, you can't commit the crime. And this is what diversion does, right? Diversion helps you reinstate those licenses. And so there's lots of things to kind of consider about what's really happening. Did we remove the predicate for the person to commit the offense? Did we solve the problem? And
Or like you said, did something else.
did something else happen, right? And so 3 years, we look, if we're evaluating a program, we look at 3 years from the exit of the program to see when the person, if the person has reoffended. When I look at 3 years, if I look at 5 years, if I look at 10 years, most of those offenses happen within this first 90 days. That is a very tenuous time for folks. That they may, especially they're returning into their community and they're returning into, they're old friends and they haven't seen them in a long time, and then they're back to where they are. And so those first 90 days or so.
And we have this.
Yeah.
This chart in the recidivism report that shows you time.
Yeah.
Recidivate.
So this is the official definition, right? This is the
Right.
1 year or more. So 71% were returned within 1 year of the 902 recidivists in the cohort, right?
Let's see here.
So if we use, just say for instance,
Yeah.
if we use convictions versus 1 or more years in jail,
Would be fine.
would you still use the 3 years as a?
If I'm evaluating a particular program, yes, I would use 3 years. If I want to see how well your policies are doing, I would probably use 5 or 10 years over a long-term period of time, right? 3 years isn't a trend for me. 3 years is just something that I'm measuring humans as they move through the system, right? If I want to measure the effects of your policy, which is a population level kind of thing, then I would use 5 or 10 years, depending on the policy and depending on how many you guys changed in the meantime. Right, because there's been times I was like, "Oh, I've got this really great study," and then you change the law on me again. Oh, yeah, there goes that. And so, so for Vermont, especially sometimes the speed at which we change criminal justice policy, 5 years is usually what we use to recommend. 5 years is probably a trend. Is what I say.
Yeah, I mean, and for example, this particular report was designed to see how well justice reinvestment was working.
Right.
And so from a recidivism perspective, we don't know yet. We won't know for many, many years because the policies that went into place didn't affect people in time for this report. So we need to, for recidivism, there are other parts of the report where you see some impacts of justice reinvestment.
And I do want to say one thing about criminal histories and using criminal histories to measure recidivism before we move on to desistance. And so the criminal histories are used a lot in the criminal justice system, not just Vermont criminal histories, but out-of-state criminal histories too. So this decides whether somebody is a recidivist for statute purposes. Do you have a DUI 1? So if you have a DUI 1, then you're DUI 2, right? If you have ag assault with a prior, so domestic violence, right? Criminal histories are used for that. The quality of other states' criminal histories is really variable. So Massachusetts has some horrible criminal histories. It looks like they charge a lot of people, but they never convict them because they're not reporting the convictions to the FBI. And the other place that criminal histories are used are to decide who gets services inside the facilities. So the Department of Corrections, and I don't know if you've actually had them talk about the impact that this bill may have on their ORAS. But the ORAS risk assessments uses criminal histories. There's a score that so they pull all the criminal histories and they come up with a score. That's part of there's a lot of things that go into the score. That's not the only thing.
That's one of the
static factors that goes into deciding what type of programming the person is eligible for, what type of supervision the person might do best when. All right, so it's an evidence-based approach to deciding community supervision and inside the facility services that the person may need, among other tools that they have. When the last time I got the out-of-state criminal histories, we looked at deciding whether or not there was the Arnold Foundation had come out with a pretrial risk assessment tool. When you talk about bail or who gets out on pretrial release, the idea behind this risk assessment tool is could they use criminal histories to predict who is going to commit a new offense, who's going to commit a new crime of violence, and who's going to fail to appear. And with a lot of the kind of national ideas that are out there, as you're, kind of a semi-official statistician, I say, most of this doesn't work for Vermont. And this did not work for Vermont. And it didn't work for Vermont for a variety of reasons. But one of the things that we point out in this report that we did on this, and it is on our website, I can send it to you, is that the criminal histories compound the injustices that are already in the system. And so if you believe that there is racism, systemic racism that is embedded in the system, then the criminal histories are making that official. And so, you're using the records of a system that is problematic, and then using those records to make other decisions on this basis of the official record says it's okay. So I just want to throw that out there as a kind of something to think about the way that we use these and what does it really say, especially when you're looking at the administration of justice as opposed to, sitting back and doing like research. When we do our research, we certainly look at what this might be saying, right? There's lots of crimes that I can commit that, because of my position in society that other people can't commit, right? And so what benefits or privileges do I get in those types of crimes versus crimes that are committed on the street? The example I always used to give is that, it's been a while since I lived in a real city, so I don't know. But the last time I lived in a real city, if I was standing on the sidewalk having a margarita, then that was a crime. But if all I had was that stoop and I just got up, right, to stretch my legs while I had that margarita, but I was still sitting on my stoop, right? Whereas now I have to walk a while before I get to a public way with my margarita, right? And so it's harder for me to commit that crime of drinking in public, or drinking in a public way, because I actually have to make more of an effort because of my privilege. Whereas if I was still living in a city and just sitting on my stoop and having a drink on a nice Saturday night, when it's warm out, right, it's easier if other people commit that crime and I can't. So those are some things to think about. We certainly go into that in our report on the pretrial release status. So that brings us to desistance. Like, how can we measure things about desistance? And we convened a meeting, and then we had lots of conversations.
Yes,
Sorry.
Before we move on to desistance, the recidivism data here is for all crimes. It's not broken down misdemeanors, felonies, property crimes, violent crimes,
Right.
for everything.
Yeah.
And the graph is only measuring the percent of people, not the percent of people who recidivated out of the whole, but the time in which people who did recidivate did that. Correct?
It is the people who recidivated. So this is the 902 people. So we have 902 recidivists in this cohort. And then this is the time at which all of them committed within those 3 years.
Okay.
I could have gone farther in time. And if there were a small number of people who waited 5 or 6 years before they got back in.
But it seems like it drops off pretty significantly
yes.
after even that 1 year mark.
Right. Well, don't forget after that one. Yes, it drops off pretty significantly after that 1 year mark. Yes, you are correct.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to make sure I was looking at and processing the right data set.
Yes. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Because of the issues with recidivism and measuring and what people want to know. So years ago, we did this study on the cost benefit of certain programs in the criminal justice system. And we looked at how many times do people come back into the system, right? So I stopped counting people here once. But you have testimony from folks, like state's attorneys and other folks, that people come back 5, 6 times. I just count them once and then I stop. Right? We have another calculation. What's the lifetime? How many times in this 10-year period did you come back into the system? And that's a different question. That's a different policy answer. So you want to get at, right? Because these are the folks who are the high utilizers of services that you hear about in the testimony. And so they're not necessarily represented by this number. So we like to count. How many times did you come back into the system? How many times did you get rearranged? How many of those were for probation violations? How many of those were for these violations of conditions of release for bail? And how quickly are you coming back in? Over the years, especially around science around addiction, for example, has evolved. This idea that you're going to stop using that first time and you're going to be successful. We know that that's not realistic. We know that people are going to slip up. And that was part of what Justice Reinvestment was about, kind of understanding the way that addiction works and how our policies allowing for the natural progression that people have to go through before they cease using. And the same thing is true with crime. It may not be easy. for me to stop committing a crime, because maybe I don't have housing or I don't have food and now I need to do these things. But I'm not doing them as frequently. Or maybe I'm not, doing as, we have a ranking of crimes in the state, that we use as researchers, but also, the judiciary uses them, other people use them. 90 is homicide, right? It is the absolute worst crime that you can commit. 10 is fish and game, right? So we have this ranking, of the most serious crimes to the least serious crimes. And so that gets at this idea of, am I committing less serious crimes? What if I was doing a lot of assaults and now I'm doing petty theft? Well, okay, that's still better for society. Not great, but better. I'm not committing violence. And so desistance is looking at this process, or this, how do we measure that people are getting better or doing less worse things? And that's what we were kind of talking about. And how do we, what's the best way to look at that? And you're not going to answer. Yes. The answer is, we don't know yet, and you probably can't do it. The National Institute of Justice, so the definition that you guys gave us was from the National Institute of Justice, and it says the process by which criminality of the individual risk for antisocial conduct declines over the life course of the individual, generally after adolescence. So when the NIJ and our colleagues there came up with this definition, it was based on a lot of research that did talk to humans, that did involve human subject research, where they were talking about people in their life course. There is a whole lot of study on adolescent boys, and there's a lot of criminology theories based on adolescent boys.
Quick question, not to interrupt you, but
Okay.
when you say generally after adolescence,
Yeah.
what's the bar that you're using for adolescence?
I'm not using, this is the NIJ's definition, is not mine, but they were usually, this was an earlier time. So they're looking at like 16, 17, 18. Not the 25,
Right,
that science
right.
would now say, right, is when your
Before.
brain starts to develop, it's not, your brain is your adult. This is because a lot of crime in other states is juvenile based. And so that's what a lot of the research is on. It's not necessarily about our older population and how we commit crime, which is different than how you see crime in other jurisdictions. But one of the things that the meeting that we convened with all the stakeholders and that we continue to have these conversations is that, and I did not check to see if they scrubbed that link, is the outlines.
This link?
Yeah.
Did you want me to click on?
Yeah, let's just see if it works.
Yes.
It does work?
No, it does not work. They did scrub it. Yes, they scrubbed it.
Oh, okay. Okay.
I will go back to the archive and get
We
that
should be able
information for you.
Yeah.
That's not the word I would use.
Okay, well, we're on, we're live.
We're online. I will get that. The CDC had a list of protective factors for communities that reduce violence. So we started there because domestic violence is one of our more common crimes. And so if you're going to reduce domestic violence, if you're going to reduce suicides, if you're going to reduce violence within the community, the CDC had these protective factors. That is what we kind of came up with as a way to get at desistance without necessarily measuring individuals as they go through life. And one of the reasons why the working group, and this was all the usual people, the Department of Corrections, the Network Against Domestic Sexual Violence, the state's attorneys, Corrections, Department of Public Safety, some random folks that we have from the research. Yeah, I mean, just anyone
And researchers, right?
Yeah.
The people that we know who
think about these
who think
things.
about these things, and we're able to bring a lot of their knowledge and thought
Yeah.
in addition to looking at the evidence.
Yes, and so we've started to work on some, to maybe identify some of these data sets that can be used to measure these protected factors in communities. But at the end of the day, if you're, how you increase housing is your policy question, right? But I don't think anyone says that increasing affordable housing is a bad, right? We know that affordable housing is actually going to increase protected factors in the community. That if people are secure in their housing, then they're actually more likely to report to the police that something is going on in their home. So that there are these other policy things that you do in this building that have an impact on communities that will have a benefit to desistance and crime. We may not be able to measure it in a statistical way, but we can take the hypothesis of, we do know that actually housing does reduce or does increase the safety factor for folks. May not necessarily reduce crime, because if I'm reporting it more, my crime rate's gonna go up. But that means I'm secure in my housing as a victim, that I'm not afraid that I'm going to lose it if I report that, or that I've got a place to go. And my kids have a place to go within the same school system because I, need safe housing. The other thing that also had to do with access to healthcare and access to services. So these ideas that you can battle with here are also going to help increase the safety of communities, and make it so that people do eventually commit less crime. It just will take a long time to measure.
And a big part of the conversation, of course, was around, again, these protective factors. And then do the programs that are currently, operating?
Yeah.
Do they actually know what protective and risk factors are available to people who are in that program, and can they collect it? And mostly the answer is no.
No.
Right. And so that makes it even more challenging to think about measuring distance. So what we decided after this meeting is more conversation, more work, but also, discussion about, is the work worth the effort of trying to come up with a measure? When we had Robin's thing, we know that doing these other policy initiatives are going to make a difference. The effort of measuring it and collecting it would be extensive.
And to give you an example, let's take the housing example as an example. We don't have a definition of stable housing. My definition of stable housing, I could say I'm stable, I think I'm housed stably, but I'm crashing on somebody's couch and they could change their minds, right? I think my buddy's gonna let me stay there forever, but my buddy's not gonna let me stay there forever. So if we ask the question, and some programs are asking these questions, are you securing your housing? That could be the answer that I give today, but next month I may not be secure in my housing. But how do we capture that, right? Especially for criminal justice programs where we're involved with people for a long period of time, our housing situations can change over a period of time. So which period of time are you measuring stable housing? And that's where it gets confusing, and where policymakers have to say, stable housing is a really good idea. But we can't necessarily put the effort into measuring it as the way it relates to crime.
Questions?
I have another question. I'm my brain's catching up here. Do you anywhere have a percentage of the recidivism crimes that are actually violations of conditions of release? And if so, how do the court backlogs play into? Because if someone makes it through the court system swiftly, they're not going to be on conditions anymore.
Right. Station.
Okay.
No, the report really is coming out soon.
Okay.
I do have something on the website that we testified to last year about conditions of release. So this definition of recidivism that's in the report is, for the most part, that really narrow definition, and so most people don't qualify. We'll talk about Yes, I have that information.
Okay.
And
We
it's
will
coming
let you
out in the
know.
report, and I will send it to you personally when it's done.
Yeah, when it's done, we'll make sure you know.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And it looks like the link to the CDC website did work. Was that?
Oh, it did work.
Although there is a big bold thing at the top that says it's being modified to comply. So I don't know if there's stuff missing or not missing.
Yeah,
We will look.
I'll
Yeah,
look.
we'll-
Thank you. No, it's helpful to get that broader view of the ways in which we create public safety by investment in community. And I'm hopeful that as those conversations continue, we might be able to, because to your point, of course, if someone's housed, they're also less likely to commit a crime in some of the instances you pointed to, because they can drink margaritas in their house. They don't need to do it on the sidewalk.
Right.
But I think it's helpful to think about. Thank you.
So I don't really actually help you with that 12, but
The only thing that we want to it's already in S12, but we just want to The only thing we hear about is that it remains in its 12, that there is a section around researchers having the access to the sealed records as well. And that is really important for the research, criminal history research. So other than
I
that,
think we understand that.
yeah, I think you do.
Yes.
Yeah, we made our point.
Senator Sheen?
I've got nothing at the moment. That was an enlightening presentation. Does the committee have any thoughts or?
Anybody? I'm just absorbing all this valuable information.
Just have a lot of thought, but it needs to.
Yeah.
I guess one question,
You can go to the top of that website and you'll see that it'll say,
Our website.
yeah, if you go to the top, no, at the top of the, Act 40, and we'll just show you for, two things. No,
The research.
yeah, so if you go all the way to the top, and you see this author prepared by, that'll just get you to email me. So you can just, if you have a thought and you don't want to remember my name or you don't know how to get in touch with me, that's all you have to do. And then if you don't at the bottom, you can actually get to all the other Act 40 reports without having to go through. You can just scroll down and then see what you want to see. And honestly, we prefer that you ask questions.
Yeah, if something
Yeah,
doesn't make
I mean,
sense
like-
or just.
My job is to answer your questions. So.
I have a quick question. I was wondering if you could shed a little more light or, just your general opinions on the timelines that we have for folks who can seal their records as it's written in this bill, at least, with the 7 years and the 3 years and then the 30 days for people 18 to 21. Do you have any thoughts on those numbers?
I don't know what impact either any of them will actually have on a human's existence. And I don't mean that to be snarky. I think that the 3 years is, from research perspective, as long as I have access. But because 3 years is what we look at to see, other people, 3 years may be too soon, right? And you're also looking at 3 years, if I recall the bill correctly, so you're looking at 3 years after the conviction, correct? And then I haven't had a new conviction, but the length of time that it may take for me to get that new conviction. So it's not a new, if I have a charge filed, can I get my expungement? Okay, so if another charge is filed,
Correct.
okay, then.
You can't apply for your expungement.
If you have a pending
But,
case,
yeah,
yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
So I think that then, as long as you're not measuring the delay in the court, right, or you're not giving shelter to the court delays and you're acknowledging that they're there, I think you're fine. I don't know that any one of any of those numbers is going to affect what we do.
Senator Hashim, isn't it 3 years from the completion of the sentence, not from conviction?
That's okay.
So it's actually
Yeah.
in the first.
It was longer out, yeah.
It's
Thank you
further
for,
out.
but yeah.
Because when I'm looking at the numbers, there's a significant drop off after 1 year, and then it is 2 people.
But
for
that's
3
their
years.
first conviction, right? Yes, and that's what you care about right now, is their first conviction, yes.
Right.
And so, yes, there is a dropout after that first year, absolutely. And, the question, and this is, I'm a researcher.
Yes.
So my mind goes in weird places. I think one of the interesting things would be is, especially around probationary sentences and in some cases the incarcerated sentences, is how many people are getting their sentences extended more towards the max. And so they're not completing at the same time. And what are the disparities there? And so because if it's not term probation and there's some amount of human decision making when somebody gets out or when somebody, completes their probation, or because they've had violations because the human has decided that there's no violations, right? Anytime you put in this idea of human high impact, high decision making points, what are the disparities going to be? And this is something that we have to kind of measure as time goes on, any change in these policies. Are we benefiting one group over another group because of those high impact, high decision making points that are being, maybe influenced by other things, other impermissible things or permissible things, but what is the, what's the unintended consequences of those? So. From our research, not policy, policy.
All right, do you have any data that compares the likelihood of someone? I'm trying to think of how to word this, but the likelihood of someone who has committed a crime to commit a crime versus the general public, because that's sort of what we've been talking about, is at what point does it become statistically the same?
I'm going to say that science doesn't tell you that. And the way that research on that is done, because there's only two groups of people, me and the Bureau of Justice Statistics, who've ever had access to all of the data, and the Bureau of Justice Statistics isn't measuring that. At least, not that I've seen recently. I can go back and look, but the other, it's all just a statistical hypothesis.
Right. Of course.
Right. And oftentimes those don't apply to Vermont. Not because we're different or special, but we are. Our crime doesn't look like other states' crimes.
Because of policy decisions or because
we're a misdemeanor heavy state.
Gotcha.
I go to national conferences and they look at our drug crime and they're like, is that a week? Come on. That's a whole year. Right. So when you have small numbers.
Yeah, no, I
Yeah.
As a former researcher, I
Yeah,
understand. Small sample size.
Yeah, right.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Any further questions? Chair?
Nothing for me, thank you.
Well, it was nice to be here.
Please,
Thank you for having us.
please reach out if you have any other questions or you need us for anything else. Or...
Thank you for your help.
Yes,
for your
sir.
testimony,
Yes,
more
yeah,
importantly.
I'm sure we will.
So, committee, what do we think? Any questions or discussions about S12 at the moment based on everything we've learned?
I don't have any at the moment.
So that was a lot of information, my brain. No, please, thank you. I just may need a moment to let it sink in.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think at this point, I don't have my notepad in front of me because I left it right there on my desk, but
Do you want me to read it to you? I actually can't, your handwriting is.
no, you won't be able to read that, but thank you.
You are correct.
I believe the remaining question we have is, well, just for context, last time we spent a lot of time talking about that inquest process and exigent circumstances and so on. What we haven't clarified is how a defense attorney or a defendant, I believe, could also access these records. I do see that we're hearing from Marshal Paul on Thursday for half an hour. And I think that could be the time we raise that question with him. Are there any other questions or lingering decision points that we have to make on S12 that I'm not aware of?
So we are waiting to hear back from Judge Zone on the sort of narrow scope of petition lists, expungement for things that are no longer crimes.
Yeah.
Because the report on petition lists, sealing or expungement was for the whole system, not for that narrow circumstance.
Gotcha. Okay. Did he say that he's going to follow up with you or specifically?
I would actually have to go back and watch the testimony to remember whether he said it was going to be with me specifically or
Okay.
with.
I can just reach out to him in the near future. I'm just trying to figure out when we can vote on this. I'm hoping by Friday. That would be great. Yeah.
The Senator Bruce gonna be here Thursday and Friday? I thought he was out of state. All right.
Yes.
Ah, right. That's a good point. All right. Well, in that case, we can probably put it up for the 25th then the following week. Does anyone remember the date for crossover, by the way?
The 14th of March.
15th. Okay, yeah. Just wanted to make sure we're well in advance of it, so, okay. All right, well, it won't take too much time, I don't think. Just to follow up with that last point on Thursday and then figure it out from there. All right. Anything else?
I'm good.
All right. Great. I think we're all set then, and we can adjourn.